Hello and welcome to another episode of the In-Depth series. As we know that Global South is trying to cope with one after another natural disaster. For that, Global Shield for Climate Risk against Climate Risk has been launched at Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, with the help of G7 and V20. To assist the shield, Global Shield for Climate Financing facility has also been launched. So we are going to discuss that only. From the perspective of GS Mains paper 3, it is important that you understand this particular topic. Very important. Apart from that, we will also talk about certain new additions such as what is Vulnerable 20 or V20 and Global Shield against Climate Risk, plus what is the financing facility for this risk and what is the situation of climate change with respect to Global South. What will be the funding process, who will benefit from it, what is climate financing in general, some initiatives that have already been undertaken, and what are the actual issues that we are witnessing with respect to climate financing, a question in the last. So let's move ahead and talk about the financing facility first. This financing facility has been launched by the World Bank Group. It will help the developing countries to access more financing in the times of need. Whenever there is any sort of disaster, the access of funds will be held through this only. And this facility is actually going to support Global Shield against Climate Risk. Global Shield against Climate Risk has been launched at Conference of Parties 27, which was recently held at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and it is a joint initiative of who? Remember this is a premise fact. The group of 7 countries and the Vulnerable 20. What is the motive of this particular shield? To better protect the poor and vulnerable people from disaster by pre-arranging more financing before disaster strike. So there is a pre-arrangement facility. It could be asked in your prelims examination. Post-arrangement, ad hoc arrangement, but you have to remember it's a pre-arrangement. Now, of course, if we have to shed light on the Vulnerable 20, let's look at this. Vulnerable 20 is a group of such countries which are highly vulnerable with respect to natural disasters that has been exaggerated by climate change. V20 Ministers of Finance of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, when they met in 2015 on 8th of October, this particular group came into being. And this meeting was chaired by 𝐃𝐫𝐬𝐧𝐥𝐶 V. Purisima, who was Secretary of Finance of the Philippines, and it was done so in Lima, Peru. The calls for having such a group was done in Climate Vulnerable Forum's Costa Rica Action Plan of 2013-15. Alright. Now, Germany is the chair of G7 currently. So, they wanted to ensure that there is a proper financing facility under this Global Shield against Climate Risk. It wants to bundle, this particular initiative wants to bundle activities in the field of climate risk insurance and prevention as well. So, 2 parts are there. Insurance is there through financing facility and prevention also. That has been done in close cooperation with V20. Alright. Now, if we talk about the basic motives of this particular facility, it wants to provide solution to provide protection. It will be devised and it can be implemented swiftly if climate related changes occur. What does this mean? If I already have an amount with respect to provision for such disasters that will take place in the future as they will, it will be very easily available to the Global South specifically. It will be linked to the contingency plan of developing countries. So, there is an ease of flow of funds. People and authority will be able to access the assistance that they urgently need. They do not have to wait for the need, and also to mobilize additional funds in order to meet the growing demand. So not only it will have its own fund, but additional funds will also be mobilized by it, as it has said. As the adaptation gap report has said that there is a huge gap with respect to what is being done and what needs to be done to adapt to climate change. So that's the reason. Right now, if we talk about the Global South, the problem is large. Temperatures are soaring, flood risks are increasing, and that can be attributed to unplanned urbanization. If we talk about this, bulk of urbanization will happen over the next 30 years in the Global South. Generally, and Global South will have a lot. The world's urban population is expected to increase by 2.5 billion people between now and 2050. That means we need proper infrastructure. We need proper planning of roads so that vehicles can move easily and they don't do a lot of emission. We also need sanitary facilities so that water pollution does not arise. We also need proper energy policy, as urban population will need more and more electricity to survive in the near future. So how we will manage electricity? We will depend on coal and or renewable energy. So all this is a matter that is related to urbanization. 90% of the growth is taking place in Asia and Africa. India will add over 200 million people if we compare the 2 years, 2011 to 2036, and this is up from 377 million to 594 million. Moving ahead, now by 2050, Africa's urban population will almost triple, which will become 21% of the global total. And new infrastructure and property will have to be built that will lead to emissions. Now moving ahead, let's talk about cities like Seoul and London, where emissions per person are lower than the national average, like that is just up to 63%. But for cities like Delhi and Kolkata, emissions per person go completely the other way, that is up to double the national average. So there are certain cities which are emitting a lot, certain are not. Moving ahead now, let's talk about who will fund this particular facility. Germany has said that they will be shelling out 170 million for the insurance plan, and it is not a tactic just to call for to dodge calls for a dedicated loss and damage, because it was for the first time ever in COP27 when loss and damage was discussed properly. Okay, so it's not a tactic according to them. For France, they are saying that we are going to donate 20 million initially, but total commitment would be $60 million for the next 3 years. Canada and Denmark are saying that they will stump up $7 million and $4.7 million respectively. Ireland is saying that we are going to commit 10 million euros. United States also has a plan to help this. Now we are seeing that countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Costa Rica, Ghana, Fiji and Philippines, or also Senegal are going to receive the benefits initially, and later on more countries will be added. We see a lot of floods in Pakistan and Bangladesh. We saw that, right? And it killed many people, also millions were displaced. So in order to assist them for rehabilitation, this is a step in the right direction. Ghana is the current chair of the B20 group right now. They have welcomed the initiative. Moving ahead now, let's talk about what is climate financing. Right now, climate financing is dedicated to two things: mitigation and adaptation. Okay, and it refers to local, national or transnational financing that is drawn from public, private and alternative sources of financing. That will help countries. The mitigation and adaptation is for those, basically, first mitigation to minimize the problems that have arisen due to climate change, and adaptation, that means to assist in case any disaster occurs, to adapt to them. So for that we need large scale investment, because we need to significantly reduce emissions. The UNFCCC, Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement, they all have provisions for financial assistance from parties, which is based on principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. We have a common responsibility towards Mother Earth, but we also have to ensure that as developed countries developed much longer, much ahead, at the expense of the developing countries, they developed. And they did their development at a time when developing countries were lagging much behind. So they had their fair share of contribution to the greenhouse gases. Now, according to that, economically they have surpassed the developing countries. Now it's their responsibility to pay attention to the economic benefit as well as environmentally sustainable economic benefit for the developing countries. Okay. Now, there is another very important facility to fund climate change, that is Global Environment Facility. It has served as an operating entity of the financial mechanism since 1994. At COP16, which was 2010, Green Climate Fund was established. Apart from that, two others under it, the Special Climate Change Fund and these Developed Countries Fund, were also established to mobilize funds. The Adaptation Fund was established under the Kyoto Protocol in 2000. So there are myriad funds, but something has failed. Why are we needing funds more and more again and again? Why are we needing not funds, but why are we needing agreements again and again? The Cancun Agreement of 2010 said we need to mobilize jointly USD 100 billion per year by 2020 in order to address the needs of the developing country, to provide them certain technologies so that they can adapt and mitigate the ill effects of climate change. And prior to 2025, they will set a new collective quantified goal from a floor of USD 100 billion per year, which this promise has been broken. This has not been fulfilled as of yet. So there are certain issues with respect to the climate financing. First is the amount of finance that we need is falling short. So according to Climate Policy Initiative, it was tracked that in 2020, $665 billion of inflow for climate financing has been done. It has doubled since the early 2010s. The per year growth has also increased 7%. Now, this was being seen enough to meet the 2015 Paris Conference goal. And this money flow needs to grow to 4.3 trillion by 2030, and we are falling short of this. So that is the problem. As we compare from 2011 to 2020, although it has increased, and even in 2021, but this particular gap, how will it get filled? What kind of financing facility will be there? So this particular financing facility can help. And more pressing needs have arisen. With respect to funding, currently we need mitigation plan, because we are seeing floods, droughts and whatnot over and over again every year. So there are other reasons. UNEP Adaptation Gap Report has already said that we are falling way behind what we are achieving and what we need to achieve. Risks could be growing faster than the global efforts to adapt. Apart from that, 84% of the 198 parties to the climate conference now have adaptation plans and policies, but around 2/3 still lack the quantified and time-bound targets. So if there are no targets, we will fall behind as a globe. The first projects were over $25 million, only appeared as recent as 5 years back. So you see, number of new adaptation projects launched by each year. This is going to show you. What is the funding? The grey ones are the least ones. Not a lot of amount is being produced for such technologies. If we talk about 25 to 50 million, it only occurred at a much nearer year in 2017. In 2018, it increased. It has been increasing, and we see over 50 million one coming here in 2017 and 2019 and 2022 as well. But it is not yet enough. Moving ahead, let's talk about the debt trap. Debt trap as in, once you have financed something from a loan, you will have to repay, right? So the current financial aid is not coming through any sort of grants, it's coming through loans. Loans will have to be repaid for developing countries, especially at a higher interest rate, okay? And there will be a negative impact on economically vulnerable countries, specifically if they are already, suffering the issues with respect to climate change. Now they will also have to pay for their grants. And you see, this particular graph is showing you from, this is being shown from the perspective of Oxfam analysis, mind you. So total climate finances and share of non-grant. If we talk about 2013, $12.1 billion has been given to finance climate change. 40% of them was non-grants. That means these were loans. In 2020, 20.4% of financing was done, for which 59% was non-grant. So you see, while the flow of aid has increased, but the flow of non-grants have also increased. The proportion has increased. That means it will have to be paid back. According to the Oxfam International, the fund flow for climate financing in 18 Asian countries, in here, non-grants accounted for nearly 70%. That means 70% of them has been loan and not grants of the total climate finance flow that they received since 2019. Now this will make the countries to be involved in a debt trap, and it became 60% in 2020, although there is we can say is an increase. So fund flows, first of all, where is the money going? That is also important. Climate financing facility has been given, and where are the funds going? Is it going to the needy or not? It is much more flowing to developed countries such as Western Europe, US and Canada. I am not saying this. This is Climate Policy Initiative which is saying this. I always talk with data. East Asian Pacific region, they account for the biggest share, which has been pretty developed. and it is mostly led by China's domestic initiative. Domestic funding is a lot there, not the national, transnational funding. Poorer countries in Africa and South Asia, they always tend to be more inclined towards international funding, which is not going their way. So you see, in East Asia and Pacific, domestic is a lot and international is less. For Sub-Saharan Africa, international, South Asia, international is much larger. Latin America and Caribbean, almost, the same. US and Canada, Western Europe, you can see the graph doesn't lie. About 76% of all the climate finance flowing done during 2011 and 2020 were raised domestically. That means international cooperation is not a lot. And in 2020, public and private sources contributed an equal share of funds raised, although government should be providing much larger, because for the governments as a whole, this is a much larger problem. Now moving ahead, there is also the problem with the methodology that is being used to compute climate financing. It is inflated. The amount that has been shown might not be exactly how it is. Advanced countries hitting the $100 billion a year mark in funding. Poor countries' climate action has been one of the question, because it is not enough attention is being paid to ensure that it is reaching the right way. It is going into their own pockets. Okay, so reported in 2019, the climate financing was $63.4 billion per year, but Oxfam says it was only 20.3. For 2019 adaptation finance, you see there is a huge difference. So this is the problem. Now, rich countries together contributed $63.4 billion in 2019, but $68.3 billion in 2020. The actual funding which is received by the developing countries could only be about 1/3. That means the global south is still suffering. It's not just the funding, but how you put these funding, where these are going. If they are going to the proper designated places, then not a problem. If you are funding yourself and showing it through stunted methodologies that this much of climate financing has been done, nothing can be achieved. Moving ahead, let's talk about the question. Which of the following countries are a part of the V20? Guatemala, Mongolia, Afghanistan, Gambia, Egypt. You have to answer through these codes given. Thank you so much for watching.